My father was a Renaissance man, that is for sure.
When he walked into a room, you knew Leo Rowsome had arrived, like, you know.
The music was his life.
I think that Leo Rowsome and his pipes represented the sound of the Irish pipes.
He was a star in recording terms, on radio terms, and in terms of live performance as well.
If you took Leo out of the equation, the piping world and the world of traditional music would be a different place.
He had a special way of playing the pipes. He was the king of the pipers.
The origins of the Uilleann pipes, or Uilleann pipes, or Irish pipes, depending on the time period you're talking to, is interesting. It seems to have come out of a European parlor instrument tradition, what we would now call a classical instrument tradition. In some ways, it could be thought of as the grafting of a Baroque oboe onto a bagpipe bag.
The Uilleann pipes are intriguing for lots of highly skilled engineers in the sense of the amount of work that goes into them and the detail.
When Captain Francis O'Neill of the Chicago Police Department wrote Irish Minstrels and Musicians, I think that he had in mind that he was documenting a tradition that was under threat. And certainly the pipes, which he prized above almost all other instruments, were one that he felt was going to become extinct, if not in his lifetime, shortly thereafter. Certainly the instrument was in decline and had been for a long time.
I was interested in the pipes. I'm fascinated by the sound, and it's like one of those things, if you're bitten, you're bitten, and again, most pipers will tell you that. And many people who are not playing pipes would have envy because they want to emulate the instrument because of the unique sound.
I've been a follower of Uilleann piping since the 50s. I've never had an ambition to be a piper. My ambitions I wouldn't rise that high. But the first time I would have heard the sound of the Uilleann pipes, and that'd be long before I actually saw a set or saw anyone playing, would have been in the 1950s, and they would have been records of Leo Rowsome.
You know, there's a lot of cliches used about music in general, and Irish music figures. So if you're talking about the pipes, the Uilleann pipes, I think if you look at the history of where the instrument has come in a couple of hundred years, from the 19th century and what happened in the 20th century, I think that it's fair to say that as a single most seminal influence in piping, Leo, it would be probably the most seminal influence in the 20th century.
My father was included in the London Times list of the 100 most influential Irish people of the last millennium. The older I get, the more mesmerised I am at the fact that any man, albeit my father, did so much. Going back to my great-grandfather's time, he was Samuel Rowsome. The family were originally Huguenots who were actually, because of religious persecution, had to leave France, and our lot settled in Ferns, County Wexford.
3 brothers arrived into Wexford around the end of the 1600s and are now buried down in Wexford near Ferns, and that's where the Rowsomes actually came from. And the family lived in the same house from about 1770 until 1930.
My grandfather, that's William Rowsome, he moved to Dublin and set up a pipe-making business in Dublin. William Rowsome was better known in the Ferns area as a violinist or fiddler of the day. He was a very, very good musician. But it was only really when he went to Dublin that he was known as a piper.
William Rowsome, who was Leo Rowsome's father, had virtually rediscovered the art of pipe making partly inspired by possibly the work of the Taylor brothers in Philadelphia, who were by then 20 years dead.
My father was born in 1903. My great-grandfather then that handed that tradition down to his son.
And in the process, he and his son developed an instrument that was more suited to the modern conditions, the louder dance halls and concert stages, and also the pitch of instruments, the contemporary instruments of that time, that people were playing in ensemble with the pipes.
There were very few people playing the pipes in his time, in the 20s and 30s. It was down to quite a minority, and I think it possibly would have ended up in a museum only for Leo Rowsome.
Leo was the 4th member of the family, and my dad was the 6th member. So Leo was the older brother, and obviously got learning the pipes much earlier. My father played the pipes as well. Tom Rowsome, he played the pipes also, and they played regularly together. And in actual fact, I mean that literally. They played the one instrument from time to time, where my dad played the regulators. They were very much a team when it came to the musical side. But Leo was definitely the performer in the family, in the sense that he was, very proficient on the pipes, and decided to make it a lifetime career.
My father, when my grandfather died in 1925, had to seriously take on. He already was helping my grandfather.
I've been very fortunate to have such a colourful life, living in a house with a father like him, and my mother, of course, as well. It was always very vibrant, lots of people coming and going, lots of interesting people, and I met an awful lot of people.
Well, we had a wonderful childhood in 9 Belton Park Road, Dublin, which was on Dublin's north side, about 2 miles from Dublin Airport. My father, because of his music business being in the house, lots of people called.
And I would always say that I'm used to that social background, and so used to sitting at the table that, for example, even if I was with my father on my own, we would have wonderful chats and great just talking and chatting all the time. He was always a very happy person.
There's sometimes a perception that the Uilleann pipes are a folk instrument. And there seems to be a sense among more naive newcomers to the instrument that it's something that could be made quite simply.
The whole thing about pipes and the reed because you have to be crazy to play these things, to try and get a reed and to get things working. It's not like going into a shop, can I have a set, and they're in tune for the rest of their life. It doesn't work that way.
Leo, as well as being an inspirational musician, was a pipe maker, and his pipes were the kind of Stradivarius of the time in terms of concert pitch pipes.
What's so distinctive about Leo's pipes is that there's a strong, vibrant sound, but very melodic. You can get several sounds or tones from the same note, with different cross-fingering. The bright notes are bright, the bass notes are bass. They sound like they should, and the balance between them. What's really remarkable about his pipes, they're almost like an orchestra.
The pipes present a particular challenge for an instrument maker, because in order to make a set of pipes, you have to have skills as a metal worker, leather worker, woodworker. You have to be able to make your own tools. The parts can't be easily bought. In fact, most parts cannot be bought at all, and that would have been doubly true in Leo's day. So virtually every component, of which there would be upwards of 200 in a full set of pipes, would have to be made by hand by the maker. And that represents a very daunting challenge.
He had a workshop at the back of the house. It was really a big shed, which On the roof, he kept a lot of rushes.
He never, at the beginning, he didn't bring anybody into his little workshop. It was just a small, very small room. I don't know how he knew where everything was.
The workshop was like an Aladdin's cave of piping. So there would be lots of equipment and parts of the pipes lying around and instruments that he was using for cutting and reeds and all that kind of stuff.
Was it just like a magical place?
There was a massive anvil to his right, and it was on the anvil that he'd beat out the staples for the reeds. And when we were little children playing upstairs, we could hear him hammering on this anvil, and it was a lovely feeling because we knew he was there. Ivory was very difficult to get, and I remember particularly he went to London one time, and he used to go to antique shops and buy any little bits of ivory that he could. And in fact he bought things like a box of 6 ivory billiard balls. And I was always wondering, why is my daddy buying billiard balls? We don't have a billiard table. Our house wouldn't have been big enough for a billiard table anyway. So it happened that he would cut these down, and he would use them to embellish the chanter, the top of the chanter, and the end of the drones and regulators of the pipes.
You'd see him working when you would be out playing in the garden. Just go through the workshop sometimes, and he'd give you a look to say, keep out, little girl,
I used to really like the smell of oranges in the workshop, which sounds absolutely outlandish, but I learned afterwards that he bought these Jaffa oranges with the beautiful orange tissue paper that wrapped around them, so that he could use the tissue paper to wrap around his very delicate cane reeds to send to Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, all over the world.
You wouldn't have a micrometer out on everything. This has to be exactly this. Especially in his reed making, the essentials, the eye of the staple is really critical in reed making, and that was always perfect. And the staple, basically the inside tube of a reed, and that was always perfect because that would affect the tuning of the chanter.
I'd go into the workshop and he'd be looking through the chanter very thoroughly, very carefully, and if he wasn't happy with it, he'd be, do another one or whatever. And people used to come to the door constantly, people coming with reeds and reeds and reeds, asking him to repair them.
I've played other sets of pipes that are excellent pipes, but every element has to be perfectly in tune. There's a little bit of forgiveness in Leo's pipes, and they're a bit like an orchestra. Each the instruments can be slightly off one another, and they just sound just right.
The best concert pitch pipes, Uilleann pipes, that are playing in the world today were made by Leo Rowsome. And some people maintain that his best sets were turned out in that time, the late 1920s to the early 1950s.
A dream come true for me was to get a set of pipes. And I remember playing in school Willa Marino, and there was a school band there, and Leon, his son Leon, was playing the pipes, and I said, my goodness, I was just fascinated by this, and went back to my mother and I said, look, you've got to get me a set of pipes. And that was a week's wages to get just the bag bellows and chanter, for her. And but I got around her and my father and went up to Leo, and he made me the bag bellows and chanter. £5 it cost in those days, Irish pounds.
I was lucky that how I came to Fleadh Pipe was my parents had a sweet shop in Thomas Street, about 6-7 doors down from the Pipers Club, and my father was from Monaghan, so he was mad into the music, so he ended up being part of the Pipers Club committee as well. And
the Dublin Pipers Club goes back to the 19th century. My great uncles had a part in keeping that going, in fact the formation of the club. It was due to the Civil War in Ireland. It had stopped to be in existence, and my father and his brother Tom resurrected that club and revived it, I should say, in 1936. The club became an absolute hive of activity, and that is where it went from Molesworth Street, Ely Place, Molesworth Street, and then to 14 Thomas Street.
Thomas Street was really Dublin, you know, the Liberties of Dublin, a very, very old part of the city. Surrounded by Christchurch Cathedral and Patrick's Cathedral, there's lots of history in that area. And if you were on your way into the club, you know, we used to go up early at 7:30, and we'd be learning and piping, and there might be an area out in the park we were going to be going to, and we all had to play together, you know. And when we'd be finished, we'd just be around the older people who'd come, and they'd have sessions. And if you went out into Thomas Street, what used to strike me was the buses would be passing and stop, and you'd see a man coming down with an instrument and say, "Is the Pipers Club around here?" And you direct them, you know. They'd be from Mayo, they'd be from Galway, they'd be from Donegal. Like, all over the country, they seem to know, if you're in Dublin, go up to Thomas Street, you know the number.
It was a hub where people from the country and people from England, abroad, anywhere who wanted to hear Irish music came. The real traditional music came to 14 Thomas Street on Saturday night to hear the music. It was rather close to Guinness's brewery, so you'd always get a whiff of the hops as you went down. And of course, the local pubs were always very handy lubricating holes for a lot of the pipers.
I started going to the Pipers Club because in Kilrush there was a famous concertina player, Mrs. Crotty, and she, for years before that, she had been coming to Dublin. She had they owned a pub in Kilrush, herself and her husband, and she had a heart condition, and she would come to Dublin for a few weeks every year, or maybe more often, and on the pretext of coming to a nursing home for respite. But I think she spent most of her time out playing music every night. And she knew all the clubs, and she got very friendly with Leo Rowsome. So, you know, before I came to Dublin, she would have told me about all that and told me about the Pipers Club. So when I came to Dublin, it was one of the first places I went to.
I thought it was very good to see country people and city people all together playing fabulous Irish music, you know. And this benign gentleman seemed to be over the whole thing, you know.
He would always dress up, you know, whereas that was very unknown for traditional musicians, especially, you know, maybe for classical musicians. He'd have a dress suit or a dicky bow, and he would play in shows that weren't strictly for a traditional audience, you know, for mainstream people, you know, so he'd have to adapt his music for that.
I was fascinated by Leo and his playing, you know. I would go to the Pipers Club on a Saturday night, and he would always, when the classes were over, not with myself but other pupils, he would then give a performance.
People would just seem to be always fascinated at the way he could play them.
And to me, he performed like an orchestra.
And that was always magic to me, you know. He was a brilliant piper.
My father was a different type of individual. He was more interested in the organisation, and Paddy McIlvanney, who was one of the founders of the cultus, he told us that he saw him as the architect of the cultus, whereas Leo was the star of the cultus. He was the performer. My
uncle Tom Rowsome, who was an amazing man, he had, across the road from the Pipers Club, he owned a gents' clothing shop. He did his training in the clothing business and then eventually opened up 2 shops. They were quite well-known shops in the day. There were gents' outfitters in Thomas Street. And his second shop was a boys' outfitters, which was I think the only one or one of 2 in the whole of the city, possibly the country at the time. And they did an awful lot of business with Guinness, where the Guinness workers would buy suits and and coats. So the clothing was made to measure. So in fact, the first Fleadh Mullen Guard is a wonderful photograph of a line of pipers in their lovely suits. And those suits were made by my Uncle Tom. In that line of pipers is one girl called Betty Nevin. And she was the only girl piper at that time.
My father was on a committee, and they were at a meeting, and they said to him, had he got a son, that the son could go to the pipes. And my father said yes, his son was only 2 at that time. But he said, I have an older girl, I have a daughter, who was all of 9. I think I'm talking 1946 or 7. And I had to go up to see Mr. Rowsome and have an interview with him to show him that, to spread my hands to see where my fingers long enough to fit the pipes, you know. I was the only girl in the 50s in Dublin playing the pipes. I don't think I was the first girl that ever played them. I think maybe in the generation before there might have been someone, but I was the only one in Dublin playing. I was very shy that time. I wasn't, you know, I was mortified.
Nowadays, there's so many festivals and music things going on, but the Fleadh in those days was unique, and there wasn't a festival every weekend in different towns. So that was the major gathering, from my memories, particularly in the 1960s, where people looked forward to it in August as a weekend where people came all from all over the country.
Major thing there was they were swapping tunes, which was fantastic for bringing the traditional movement further.
Like all the families in the club, the Pipers Club, we'd all meet down the fan. That was our social life, going to Fleadhs, yeah.
Yes. And my Uncle Tom, of course, his car was known as the club car because he brought all the young students around for feshes and Fleadhs and all this sort of stuff.
Big packed cars, 9 and 10 in the car and go off. You wouldn't be allowed to do it now.
Age 4 to 14, we were at every single Fleadh Cheoil, and even to this day it gives me a great understanding of the geography of Ireland with all the various little towns that we were brought to when we were small.
You know, I have memories of sitting in little places and being in Mullingar and being at Fleadh Cheoils and hearing musicians, music, traditional music all the time.
It was, for us as children, it was a freedom. It was really a freedom for us to run wild around a town like Listowel, and nobody was worried about you, just come. And then there was a bit of a structure to the weekend because you go to competitions, decide which competitions you're going to see, and that's very intense who lost and who won at that stage. It was pretty competitive, like so.
They weren't kind of predominating in pubs and that sort of thing. They used hardware stores and drapery stores, and the owners would take their stock out and put in seats, and people would go in and play their instruments.
Every room you went into, every pub, they were all playing traditional music, It was absolutely a brilliant family time,
I've spoken to people in my own travels through work around the country, and they would say that when Leo played in a village, the entire village would come out to see him.
My grandfather, he laid down the foundations to my father's tutor for the Uilleann Pipes. My grandfather, William, he started to write a tutor, and very, very sadly, because he died in 1925 and he was only in his mid-50s, he couldn't complete the tutor, but he had the foundation of it. So obviously my father then took it on hand and added to it and finished it off.
Absolutely massively important is the teaching that he did.
My father came to teach in the Municipal School of Music at a very early age of, would you believe, 17. And the reason was that he was well known. He had already become well known in the Dublin area. He could write music proficiently. He was excellent in the theory of music.
For me, he was the only teacher. I have problems with teachers from day one anyway, you know, so the idea that I had one teacher anyway that I liked was good, you know. And
well, the first occasion that I met him was to get from him the practice set that he had made for me. I had written to an address in Dublin. It turned out to be his brother's tailor's shop in Thomas Street, looking to start on the pipes. And eventually I got a letter back from Leo saying to call into the College of Music in the centre of Dublin, and he would have a practice set ready for me. And I could sign up then for the lessons. So
only had the 30 minutes a week, you know, and that was it. So, you know, he would recognise, and then either it was going to happen or it wasn't going to happen, you know. I mean, there's a lot of pipers sort of went in, including, incidentally, the great Willie Clancy. Willie went into Leo for lessons as well. He was going there just to get his style. Now, you know, Willie had his own style of piping, but he was fascinated by Leo, you know.
You go in through the front door, and it was kind of musty play, kind of an old building as well. But you went upstairs then to the back room, and you queued on these forms, like we're all in short trousers, you know, and you just listened to the lesson as, you know, it wasn't a private, you know, we all sat together, 10 or 15 of us, listening to each one's lesson, and you get the lesson. And part of the lessons was that you were listening to other people's lesson, you know. I don't know how he was able to write music every week. He wrote tunes individual. There's no photocopying, so every week you got written tunes, and he could write. If somebody asked him for a tune, he could sit down on a packet of cigarettes and write the whole tune out. You know, I mean, never seen anybody like that before. Like, it was like writing for him. Like, you know, it was gorgeous writing as well. Like his.
My father hand wrote all his music for his pupils. They never had to buy music.
We have manuscripts in Leo Rowsome's own hand because, as you know, when he taught a class or taught a pupil on an individual basis, he would teach them by example and so on, but then he would write out the tune for them, and seemingly he was very fluent. He would just sit down, and in a few moments he would have transcribed a tune, and the pupil would take that away as an aid to memory for the next class. So he was privileging the oral transmission but giving the notation as a reminder. So we have quite a number of those in the archive that have come to us from various pupils that he had over the years.
He had the thing that he was very fond of, having a tune with parts in it, if you like, the tune itself and the counterpart melody, and he would write out the counterpart melody and the tune on my copybook, and he'd get me to play the one part, and he would play the other, and he did that several times while I was going to him.
You know, with all the pupils, I remember when I was 12 or 14, playing in the Fesh or Clea, the Dublin competition, you know, that took place in the Mansion House. And I won. I couldn't believe it, out of 26 pipers under 16. And he carried me down the middle of the throws me. So you can imagine for me, this whippersnapper who sort of came on the scene.
And all of the people who came to learn from my father became his friend, became our family friends.
I think I got to know Leo's son Uilleann first. We were about the same age, and we got friendly, and I'd be invited out to the house. My wife then taught in the same school as Leo's wife, and so they got very friendly. So we had from both sides. And we'd go out there, and I'd be playing with Uilleann and Liam and Helena as well. She was learning the whistle at the time. And Leo, if he wasn't too busy in the workshop, but he usually was too busy, but sometimes he'd come in and join us.
Leo was based in Dublin. He was a professional musician, and he played and presented himself at a professional level. So he was quite often on Irish radio, and that brought the sound of the instrument and his name into many, many houses around the country.
He was from the 1920s. He was just the music of the day. He was actually 3 times a week, sometimes he would have actually broadcast from 2RN, later called Radio Uilleann. The Leo Rowsome Pipes Quartet became rather famous. It broadcast on Radio Uilleann about once a week for quite a while. They also went to Glasgow to do broadcasts and concerts.
I perhaps knew Leo from listening to his Pipes Quartet every Sunday night. I was allowed to stay up because I was going to school the next day, but I would never miss the Pipes Quartet. And just the sound of that instrument was wonderful, you know.
It was amazing the amount of interest in those days. I mean, recently met a medical man who, we got talking about music, of course, and he said to me, "Oh, your name?" He said, "Gosh, I remember my father, because we were the only ones in West Galway having a radio set in our kitchen on a Saturday evening when your father was playing. All the local people would gather in our kitchen and listen to your father on the radio set."
He was highly regarded by RTE. Like, he was very professional. He could be relied on, and he'd always put on a good show, you know. And he was always well turned out. He normally wore good clothes and a dicky bow, you know, which would be kind of unusual for a traditional musician in those days.
Most weekends he wouldn't be, certainly in the 50s and early 60s, he wouldn't have been at home. He would have been recording for the BBC. He is reputed to be the first Irish artist to appear on BBC television in 1933.
There was a kind of symbiosis between the gramophone industry and the radio industry. So radio, as today, just rebroadcasts and amplifies the recordings made, and then people go out and hear about them and buy them and so on. Well, Leo Rowsome was the most prolific recorder on the Uilleann Pipes on the discs called 78s. And they were old discs, they're obsolete now, that revolved at 78 revolutions per minute. Leo Rowsome recorded these 78s in London and in Dublin, and he earliest recorded in London. He was a regular visitor to London, usually around Patrick's Day and that, and became known to the recording companies there who wanted to put material on the market for the new Irish Free State. So he almost started recording in the same period, but 1925 in his case. So it was for a new market that British manufacturers were supplying. And he made about 40 in all. He made them for different companies, Columbia, Winner, Imperial, Broadcast, and so on. He was a very prolific recording artist in London in those years, and they were, of course, manufactured and sold, sent over to Ireland and sold here in Ireland. When the 78 era ended, around 1960, Leo Rowsome was still recording. He transferred to the new technology of vinyl recordings, microgroove recordings, and he made an early EP for the Cladder Records in the mid-60s, and then he made the first LP of piping.
Cladder Records came about by the Honourable Gareth Brown, who is part of the Guinness family. And Gareth was originally a pupil of my father's. He used to learn the pipes from my father. And he was very interested and fascinated by all things Irish. So Gareth, anyway, very, very cleverly decided that, right, let's do this. And the first LP was the first one. It was CC1, the King of the Pipers, he called it. And that was my father's. That was the start of Cladder Records. That was the very, very first disc.
I suppose the main difference between the modern recordings of Uilleann Piping and Leo Rowsome's recordings is that his were largely unaccompanied. So it was himself. Now he was accompanying himself with the regulators, all the harmonic possibilities of the Uilleann Pipes, whereas now the pipes are very much integrated into larger ensembles or groups, so they would be interacting with maybe fiddle, with maybe barron or keyboards or something like that, whereas it was much closer to its origins, I think, as a solo instrument in his recordings.
He didn't have a narrow-minded outlook in any way as far as music was concerned. That is another dimension to him, and I think something people tend to overlook.
I mean, I was the first in the house to bring in a pop record, but he didn't say, get out, you know. In fact, he enjoyed them. One of the ones he liked listening to was Cliff Richard, The Bachelor Boys.
On one occasion, I went into the class in Chatham Street, and Leo, the first thing that he said to me was, Terry, did you hear the latest Beach Boys record? Aren't the harmonies wonderful in it? So I think he was open to any kind of well-made music would have pleased him, and he would share his interest in it.
He would actually play something or find some piece of music that would suit you or that you'd like or find at home with.
He would play In the Mood for some of my teenage friends, you know, to be trendy, keep me happy. I used to love coming home with him on the bus because we had a great chat, and we'd come home and he'd sit on one side of the fire and I'd be in the living room beside him, and my mother would have gone up to bed at this stage and we'd be talking away and have great fun, and she'd sort of bang the ceiling and say, come up to bed, you two. I left home when I was 24 years of age because I only moved away because I was getting married and my husband was teaching in Northern Ireland. Myself and my twin sister were married. And my mother told me how sad he was, that one of us was going to Belfast to live and the other was going to County Clare. And he was kind of quite upset about that, you know, because my brothers had more or less grown up and they had fled the nest anyway.
I was married on the 10th of August 1970. 6 weeks later, my father dropped dead.
I was devastated when he died. I can still remember the day that he died, and I can still remember being at his removal in Donnycarney Church and what the day and the evening was like, and it was a huge loss.
I suppose his death really had a big effect, you know, because he was such a presence in the world of piping that when he died, he was the only full-time maker in the country.
He always said he wanted to die with the pipes on, and virtually nearly did, you know.
I honestly feel that the most important thing from Leo, you know, he believed in these pipes. He loved them. It was him. He was a pipes man, you know, that was it. That was his life. And he loved passing it on. He wasn't holding anything back, you know.
I think Leo would be absolutely delighted to have known that in the decades immediately following his death, there were others to take up the torch, and that some of his students would go on to become very well-renowned pipers in their own right. His role as a teacher and instrument maker, as well as performer, helped keep the instrument alive during that period and even after his death.
The interest in the pipes was just grew and grew in different countries. Now, I pick, for instance, Japan, and they now have a Peabody Uilleann Japan, a whole society of Uilleann pipers, and there's 12 pipe makers. And when I was there about 5 years ago, they honoured me with the honorary chairman of the Japanese Uilleann Pipers Association.
I'm playing the pipes nearly 40 years now, and I have a lot of recordings of Leo's, and I still can pick things out that I haven't heard him do before. I'm still learning things from listening to him, even now, and sometimes it takes me a couple of spins listening to one tune or one track to figure out what he's doing.
When I hear pipers on the radio, and I sometimes mistake them for Leo initially because they sound like the pipes that he made.
I can hear him playing when I hear the likes of, say, Liam O'Flynn. I mean, Liam O'Flynn just plays so like him.
I think he has had an amazing effect on the traditional movement in Ireland, not just the Uilleann Pipes, because the Fleadh and the Cultus movement brought forward every instrument, not just the Uilleann Pipes.
Leo will still be referred as the benchmark in terms of, if you make a set as good as Leo Rowsome pipes, then you have it made.
For somebody to actually make the instrument, teach the instrument, and perform the instrument, that's the whole package of survival. So he was everything. He was everything for the Uilleann Pipes.
He had a huge impact, and you know, I'd be eternally grateful for having had the opportunity to meet him, because he had a huge impact, you know, and he's inspirational, you know.
But I learned more, now that I can look back on it, you learn more. You think you're learning music, but you're learning a lot more from the man, you know, about without any words being spoken. Like, you know, you're learning a lot about. He's passing on more than just the music to you, you know, and I appreciated that now really more than ever, you know.
I mean, I know there's fabulous pipers now and they put the feeling into it, but he was just a master, you know.
Of course, in my estimation, he was king of the pipers, and he always will be.